Whereas the hormonal and evolutionary explanations focus on biological mechanisms, the social role model offers a psychological explanation, proposing that differences between men and women in aggressive behavior are the product of differences in gender roles acquired in the process of socialization. Eagley, 1987. According to this approach, biological sex has little explanatory power in itself, but is linked to differences in aggressive behavior via differential social roles associated with being male or female. Richardson and Hammack, 2007. The male gender role is associated with assertiveness and dominance, which facilitate aggression, whereas the female gender role is associated with characteristics such as nurturance and empathy, which prohibit the display of aggressive behavior. The finding that women are more likely than men to experience feelings of guilt and anxiety when engaging in aggressive behavior supports the idea that aggression is incompatible with female role prescriptions. Campbell, 2006. It follows from this line of reasoning that gender differences in aggression should disappear if role demands inhibiting women's aggression are removed, and several studies have found this to be the case. For example, in a study by Lightdale and Prentice, 1994, gender differences disappeared when participants were de-individuated, i.e., tested under conditions of anonymity. Participants had to play a video game in which they could attack their opponents by dropping bombs. Figure 4.1 displays the findings for men and women under de-individuated versus individuated conditions using the log-transformed data reported by Lightdale and Prentice, 1994. When participants were individuated, i.e., when they were personally identified by large name badges, men dropped significantly more bombs on their virtual opponents than did women. However, in the de-individuated condition, when they could drop the bombs under the cloak of anonymity, women were no less aggressive than men. Figure 4.1 Gender differences in aggression as a function of individuation versus de-individuation. So on the y-axis is the number of bombs from 1.2 to 1.7, and the two categories on the x-axis are individuated and de-individuated, and the two sets of bars are men and women. Okay, so when they are individuated, so gender differences are made apparent, the difference is only between men drop 1.5 bombs and women drop 1.4 bombs. But they say the p-value is significant, less than 0.05, and in the de-individuated condition, men drop about 1.6 bombs and women drop about 1.61 bombs, and they said there is no significant difference between groups. Okay. The meta-analysis of 64 studies by Betancourt and Miller, 1996, further showed that gender differences in aggression are reduced when provocation is involved. Arguably, aggression in response to provocation or under conditions of anonymity is less at odds with female role prescriptions, and the decrease in gender differences under these circumstances reflects women's sensitivity to gender role norms. In the same vein, a meta-analysis by Betancourt and Kernahan, 1997, of the impact of aggressive cues on aggressive behavior found that, in the absence of provocation, women were significantly less responsive to aggressive cues than were men. However, under conditions of provocation, both men and women showed increased levels of aggression when presented with aggressive cues. The concept of hegemonic masculinity, referring to a set of gender-related beliefs that essentialize male-female differences, i.e., regard them as a biological given, also sees gender role socialization as a key factor in the higher tendency to show aggressive behavior by men compared with women. In the course of socialization, boys internalize normative expectations of how they should feel, think, and act as a male in their respective society. For example, they learn that they should be dominant and stand up for themselves in conflict situations, suggesting aggression as an acceptable form of male behavior. To the extent that they find it difficult to conform to these expectations, men are thought to experience gender role stress either chronically or in specific situations, for example, when they have to accept orders from a female boss. Engaging in aggressive behavior, which is part of the masculine gender role, is one way in which threatened masculinity may be restored. The impact of masculine gender role socialization on men's aggressive behavior has been highlighted by research on hypermasculinity, also referred to as the macho personality pattern, Mosher and Sirkin, 1984. This construct seeks to explain individual differences in aggression between men. The macho personality pattern consists of three related components: calloused sexual attitudes towards women, the perception of violence as manly, and the view of danger as exciting. Since aggression is deeply ingrained in the male gender stereotype, macho men are expected to show aggressive behavior to a greater extent than men who do not endorse this hypermasculine role. In support of this reasoning, positive correlations were found between the endorsement of the macho personality pattern and aggression. In an experimental study by Reedy et al. 2009, hypermasculine men were more aggressive towards a female confederate in terms of delivering electric shocks in the competitive reaction time paradigm than men who scored lower on hypermasculinity, particularly when they were led to believe that the woman had rejected the traditional female gender role. The social role approach explains gender differences in social behavior as the result of the individual's adaptation to particular social conditions and role requirements, varying over time and across societies. The evolutionary approach sees the roots of this adaptive process in the fight for survival, focusing on differences in reproductive strategies between men and women. This view leaves little room for variations in aggression across cultures and historical periods, and indeed views evidence of cross-cultural similarity in aggression as supportive of its claims. Although evolutionary and social role explanations stress different processes underlying gender differences in aggression, they are not necessarily incompatible. As has been noted by Eagley and Wood, 1999, the two approaches can be fruitfully combined if they are placed along a continuum from distal to proximal influences. The evolutionary account is concerned with so-called distal factors that explain the long-term emergence of gender differences in the human species, whereas the socialization approach emphasizes the proximal influences that impinge on individuals in the course of their development. Moreover, the two approaches can be reconciled by observing the difference between intrasex aggression and intersex aggression. There is evidence that evolutionary theory is better able to explain aggressive behavior within male sex groups, whereas social role theory is better able to explain men's aggression towards women. Wolf and Houston, 2015. Summary: individual differences in trait aggressiveness, trait anger and hostility, irritability, emotional susceptibility, and dissipation versus rumination following an aggression eliciting stimulus have been linked to differences in aggressive behavior. Moreover, hostile attributional bias, i.e., the tendency to interpret others' behavior as hostile, was found to predict adults' aggressive behavior. Of the big five personality factors, neuroticism was found to be positively correlated with aggressive behavior, whereas extroversion, conscientiousness, agreeableness, and openness to experience showed negative correlations with aggressive behavior. Research on narcissism has shown that it is not low self-esteem, but unrealistically high and fragile self-esteem that makes individuals susceptible to aggressive behavior. Individuals holding inflated and/or unstable views of themselves are more easily threatened in their self-esteem and are more likely to show aggression to restore a positive self-appraisal. Research on self-control and aggression has demonstrated that the failure to control aggressive impulses may explain individual differences in aggressive behavior. Research on gender differences in aggression has established that men are more physically aggressive than women. Men also score higher than women on measures of verbal aggression, although the difference is smaller than for physical aggression. However, research on aggressive women suggests that women may choose indirect, relational forms of aggression to a greater extent than do men. There is no conclusive evidence so far on the role of the male sex hormone testosterone in explaining higher levels of male aggression. The debate on how to explain gender differences in aggression has focused on the evolutionary versus the social role approach. The evolutionary approach attributes gender differences in aggression to differential reproductive strategies in men and women, whereas the social role approach emphasizes the significance of gender-specific roles and norms to which men and women have to adapt in their social behavior. Recent theorizing has offered an integrative perspective in which evolutionary hypotheses refer to the distal roots of gender differences in the development of the human species, and sociocultural explanations refer to the proximal influence of socialization processes in individual development.